Another issue that's going to be actually very, very complex to deal with for a country that's looking at growing jobs in the economy. For all of you harboring dreams about working with top IT firms in the country, here's something that might be a dampener. The IT industry will see 20% less recruitments this year. This is major players like TCS and Infosys are focusing on more automation, according to industry body NASSCOM. NASSCOM chairman C.P. Gurnani says that this drop in recruitment will not affect the industry's growth and expects to see revenues increase by between 10 and 11%.
The impact on Indian IT industry, I think over the next 1 year would be that our hiring will reduce and that many of us in Indian IT industry will embrace automation. So I guess it is early times, but a definite time and a definite direction towards automation.
Well, that's C.P. Gurnani saying that they expect hiring to slow down because industry is going to embrace automation. What is going to be the challenge of that? Joining us now to discuss this is R. Chandrasekhar, the president of industry body NASSCOM. Mr. Chandrasekhar, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18. A 20% lower hiring forecast, if one goes by what companies like TCS, Wipro, Infosys have had to say this quarter for FY17. This takes me back to a conversation that I had with Rohan Murthy almost 3 years ago, where he said that nobody is talking about the big disruptor, and that's automation and the impact it will have not just on efficiency for the industry but on jobs. Do you believe that this has been a largely ignored area?
No, I think this is certainly an issue which is now a reality and something which confronts us in the immediate present, not in the distant future. And I think that the point which was made by Mr. Gurnani is actually drawing attention to this very, very important trend, which I believe as a country affects us in many different ways. First and foremost, if you take some of the largest companies, then as was indicated, they are certainly focusing on automation, on the use of disruptive technologies to deliver greater business value for their clients. You also heard some of the companies trying to make greater use of their bench strength, which actually means that you are going to, it's going to have a cascading impact on the fresh hiring. So all of these are trends which are taking place, and the use of disruptive technologies has yet another impact, and that is that you have to be closer to the customer, you have to have more of the domain, and this translates into perhaps a slightly greater proportion of hiring on-site rather than offshoring or off-site. So all of this does alter the recruitment or the job hiring figures. And this is the picture for a lot of the large companies. And on top of that, as we had indicated at the time of our strategic review a couple of months ago, we had said that the growth in the current year is estimated at around 10 to 12% or around 11%, which is in terms of comparison of the growth rates, that's about 10% lower figure than the current year's 12%. So it's a 1% lower than that. So the other other factor is that because of rising productivity, the linearity between revenue and hiring in the conventional areas or even in the application of disruptive technologies is reducing. So these are all the factors, I think, which contribute to a certain moderation or a muting of the hiring trends. But on the other side,
going to get, Mr. Chandrasekhar, just to take that point forward, how bad are you expecting things to get? Because, as you pointed out, companies are pushing, for higher utilization rates. They're pushing for higher productivity. They're also pushing, perhaps, or being forced to hire more offshore because of the kind of provisions that are coming in, protectionist provisions, perhaps you could call them that, as part of various, visa regimes. What is this actually going to mean? I mean, is this 20% number going to look significantly worse as we go along?
No, I think to complete the whole picture, I had presented you only one half of the picture, but there is another half which is, I think, equally significant and which can't be ignored. And that is that while this is what is happening in the case of some of the larger companies, we are also seeing a big growth in the GICs which are coming into India, the global in-house centers of some of the global companies. In fact, yesterday and today we were having the GIC conclave at Hyderabad. And it's quite amazing to see the kind of growth that is taking place, both in terms of the number of companies coming in. We've had more than 200 of them coming in the last 5 years. We've had 60 of them coming in the last couple of years. And both the quantity and the quality of the work that they are doing and the kind of value addition is simply amazing. Then we've also seen the boom in the startups, which we think will continue despite the fact that there are, some slowdown in terms of the ease of getting finance. But the number of entrepreneurs and the number of companies
Mr.
coming up.
Chandrasekhar, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but while you're talking about GICs, you're talking about startups. I mean, you can't compare the kind of startup hiring to what a TCS or an Infosys does. I mean, TCS has given out 45,000 offers to freshers this year. Which startup can compare with that kind of number?
No, I think when you are comparing it, you have to compare the differential between what was happening in the earlier years and now, and not the absolute numbers. There is no doubt that when you look at the absolute numbers, it's a no-brainer. There is no comparison between the kind of numbers which the large companies hire and the numbers which smaller companies hire. But just to give you a kind of comparative idea, we get almost 4 startups coming up every day, and as I said, we get we've had 60 new GICs coming up in the last couple of years. And, you can easily do the math on that. Some of the GICs tend to grow very rapidly because the whole idea of a new GIC coming in is to really scale up their operations very quickly. Whereas if you look at the companies, what is happening is that there's a percentage reduction in the kind of new hiring that they are doing. So these are, trends and counter trends. We had indicated at the time of the strategic review that we don't expect the hiring to go above last year. So it could be around that number or a little bit lower because of these two trends and counter trends, which are pointing in a different, which contribute differently. But I think the key point is, I think, the fact that this industry is not only disrupting every other industry, it is disrupting itself. And in the process, the hiring within the industry will slacken, both in relation to the revenues as well as in terms of the overall contribution. But I think the key factor to take into account is that while this may be the impact within the sector, it's also important to take into account the way in which it impacts other sectors and where it is actually creating jobs. So the jobs
I get the point that you're making, Mr. Chandrasekhar. So on that aspect, before we close, let me ask you the final question. Given the fact that we're moving towards disruptive technologies, automation, and so on and so forth, in terms of reskilling, a new skill set, what now is the challenge that industry faces? Can we expect new niches to be opened up, new jobs to be created in new niches, for instance?
I think you're absolutely right, and that is exactly what we are focused on. And we have, in fact, in NASSCOM actually set up small groups within the industry to look at, the impact of disruptive technologies and the impact of disruption on the industry and the kind of work it does, and on organizations, both on the supply side as well as on the customer side. The second is on skills. I mean, what are the new kinds of skills which are in demand, which are the skills which are at risk, and what do we need to do to prepare for the future? And this impact is both in IT as well as even more significant outside of IT. And you would recall the report on the future of jobs which was brought out at the time of the Davos meet. And that stopped at the point where it said that this will have a huge impact. It will have an impact which depends on geography, it depends on the sector, it depends on the economic progress, etc. So it's the time has really come now for us as a country to look at what this means for us, what it means within
Yeah.
our economic realities, and start looking at different sectors, because just doing the same kind of skilling or assuming that
Yeah.
the same kind of job growth in the sectors will happen is no longer feasible. We have to take a cold hard look,
Absolutely.
and in fact NASSCOM is actually working on trying to do that jointly with the government to look at what impact this will have on jobs, not only within the IT sector but maybe across other sectors also, as a result of the impact of IT and disruptive technologies.
All right, Mr. Chandrasekhar, we'll have to continue with this conversation on a later date as well. This is going to be a matter that will require intervention, not just of industry, but also some long-term thinking on the part of the government. But we appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18 on what is a complex and a complicated matter that we will need to deal with as on both fronts, the government as well as industry. But Ron,